you're a very participating member of our community, and a couple of things that have happened in the time that you've been around and already been investing, man. So like, how has that felt? This idea that you're like, oh man, this reminds me of Atlanta 20 years ago. Then you are starting to buy real estate. Then you're actually starting to see these like dominoes fall that tell you that the domino rally is on. What are you thinking about now these days?
I still think we're in the infancy in Jacksonville. It's still the lowest cost of living, probably in the Atlantic Ocean in Florida.
That makes sense. For a city.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, somewhat the whole Daytona, St. Augustine to Flagler, Jacksonville area is still a lot of untapped potential there. And the further south you go along the Atlantic, the cost of living raises dramatically.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a lot of room to grow into that. It's a great place, I think, for working class and families to come, that they can come and be near the beach, be in Florida with that great tax, no state income tax and everything like that, and still be close to the beach, living in Florida. The wage growth, I mean, I studied the wage growth the last couple of years. It's averaged over 12% wage growth in Jacksonville.
Did you study that wage growth before you started watching the Not Your Average Investor show, or was that something that you tuned your antennas into once we started talking economic growth?
Probably really at the beginning. I don't think before, but at the beginning, because wage growth is another area when you're looking at investing and you say, well, what's the deal with wage growth? Well, those people are your tenants basically, and they pay your rent. So if their wages are going up, there's a good chance of rent growth in the area.
Yeah.
And 12% I don't think that's sustainable. That's very high. But if it's growing at 12% when wages are growing 3 to 4% in the rest of the country, well, if they come down to stagnant or something like that, the potential for wage growth is still there. And I think a lot of that is because, just like you say, it's one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in Florida now.
Yep.
Another great thing. Yeah, from 2010 to 2020. Yes, till today.
Right now.
You've had explosive growth there. Yeah. Some of the other population centers in Florida are slowing down a little bit. Well, slowing down from, there's still fast growth.
The rate of acceleration.
Yes, because it's still, they're not Chicago or Detroit or anything like that, where you're kind of losing population or anything like that. But the rate of growth has slowed down.
Yeah, because of affordability, right?
Affordability somewhat, and also because they've had such great growth in the past that they're filling up. Jacksonville, you still have some open spaces and room to grow.
Tons of open spaces.
Yes, much more than you do in, like certainly the South Florida area where I grew up in, and like that. They're literally bumping up against the Everglades.
That's right. They have that natural border there. It's almost like being on a coastline. It's like being on its own little peninsula because you can't move into a national park.
You can't go west of Weston. It's right up.
Yeah,
exactly.
That makes sense, man. The wage growth thing is so real. Like, I remember when I moved here, I thought that moving from Miami to Jacksonville, I was going to lower my cost of living. I knew that was going to happen. I knew that my quality of life would go up because I equate quality of life directly to how many days a year I surf, right? And I knew that was going to go up 10x. I thought I was going to pay a penalty in wage growth, right? Like, I thought that going to a smaller market than Miami, wage growth would be less. And while I'm an entrepreneur, so it's less correlated to like where I live, right? Because I kind of kill what I eat. My wife immediately was making like 30% more than she was making in Miami as a W-2 architect. And today she's making more than double what she makes and what she was making in Miami just 4 years later.
And equate to the cost of living, it's probably triple or quadruple, actually.
100%. Which, and I think we want to educate the community. If anybody is new here, it's the idea of, we talk about wage growth. Why don't you explain it? Why is wage growth and why is this stuff important if I'm trying to get educated on rental property investing?
Well, the wage growth has everything to do with the rise in rents. Quite honestly, you can't raise rents if people are not making more money. When people make more money, they can afford to pay more in rent. And naturally, the rent appreciation is higher in a place. Two things: the migration patterns, are getting more people there, and are they making more money? Those two things are critical when it comes to rent growth. I mean, you can even have stagnant wages if you have a rapidly growing population because it feeds the population and grow that way. But having both is a double whammy that is amazing for that. And we have had phenomenal rent growth here in Jacksonville.
Yeah. Wage growth, like you said, wage growth has two things, right? Wage growth increases your cash flow because rents will go up, right? So you're buying under a certain condition right now with positive cash flow, but as time progresses, the rent is going to go up and your expenses stay the same because you're in these like fixed mortgages. And it also is nice for the demand for rental property housing, right? Like if I'm a young person that's looking at opportunities and where to grow, or I'm a blue collar family that's just like, man, I just need to make a couple more shekels and reduce my cost of living. I'm going to look around and think, oh, if there's better wage growth in this town called Jacksonville with wonderful weather and beaches and all this stuff, I'm going to move there for the opportunity. And that provides risk mitigation for us as investors.
Yeah, and more competition for rents. The more people, the more competition there is, because quite honestly, in a fast growing area, they can't build houses fast enough,
Yeah.
and it makes it for a more competitive environment.